What's the plan? I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Hello, and welcome back to What's the Plan, the podcast where we dive into the matters of our careers in the architecture and urban planning field. This is our first recording post-launch, and we just wanted to say thank you for the support you've all shown us. This is also the first recording that we're doing virtually, so, well, we hope it sounds good. Let us know. Anyway, I'm Hayley.
And I'm Andrea. So, Hayley, what's the plan this week?
This week's plan is all about revitalizing city streets, specifically streets of downtown Toronto. So, what are downtown Toronto streets currently like, Andrea?
Yeah, so despite the downtown core being quite walkable and public transit is pretty friendly, the city itself just cannot seem to rid its dependency on cars. Mm-hmm. And this is even more prevalent when policy issues regarding roadways such as highway removals, tolls, and taxations are brought into city council discussions. A lot of times, city council from the suburbs, they just shut it down because they're but how are we supposed to get into the city if we can't drive in it? So it's really hard to tackle anything that talks about streets. So with that being said, most roadways in Toronto, in downtown Toronto specifically, are 4 vehicle lane streets with small sidewalks that are usually about 2 to 3 meters wide. So they're not pretty wide. It's enough for 2 people to pass by each other. Mm-hmm. And as a result, the experience for pedestrians are not the greatest, especially in the age of COVID where physical distancing is key.
Mm-hmm. So it's important also to say that this isn't new information. We've always known that the sidewalks, specifically within downtown Toronto, are very narrow and aren't really accessible. Mm-hmm. And it's been a problem for years now. However, planning of public spaces in Toronto is an extremely lengthy process, and a very small percentage of street interventions are actually put into action. And when they are, they're rarely ever followed through permanently. Like many other facets of governance, the pandemic has pushed the city to change their ways, and several proposals are being brought forth by the planning community. In today's episode of the podcast, we'll be looking at 2 of these proposals, one for University Avenue and one for Yonge Street.
Yeah, so for University Avenue, the project is actually called University Park. So University Avenue currently is the widest street in all of downtown Toronto, aside from the Gardiner Expressway, which is a highway. So it's obviously, University Avenue is an 8 vehicle lane wide avenue, 4 going north and 4 going south, and is separated by an extremely wide median that is about approximately the same width of 4 lanes. So it's basically the width of a highway that is not a highway in the middle of the downtown core. So with so many cars on it, it's just very terrifying for pedestrians to, walk around it. So in addition to its grand size, it's decorated with memorials or statues of prominent historical figures along the streets, starting from the lake all the way up to Queen's Park, which is where the Ontario Legislative Building is situated, which is also where the provincial government of Ontario meets. And this is also the same area of University of Toronto St. George campus. So this area is quite prominent when it comes to the city. From a pedestrian standpoint, walking along University Avenue is quite intimidating with all the cars and lack of landscaping. It's quite gray with all the abundance of concrete and the gray stone materials that line both the sidewalk and also the buildings next to it. It makes the street feel really cold. And this is further exacerbated by the row of high-rise office buildings and hospitals. So not only are you in a very flat, cold landscape, but these tall buildings kind of dwarf you and make you feel extremely small. So essentially University Avenue is a promenade for cars.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you compare it to the width of a highway. I've never thought about it that way personally, but imagining walking across a highway is extremely terrifying.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you take an Uber ride in Toronto and you're trying to get across the street, a lot of times Uber drivers like going on University Avenue because there's a lot of space for cars and a lot of cars go on that street very fast. So yeah, when you do have to cross that street, you have to look, make sure no cars are turning left, because a lot of times they would just turn left legally onto the street and stuff like that. With that being said, The proposal of University Park is developed in line with City of Toronto's 2018 Toronto Core Downtown Planning Initiative. And this initiative is designed by Public Works, which is a urban design and landscape architecture studio in Toronto. And they're also behind some of the projects that are beloved by the city, such as the Bentway, which is revitalizing under the Gardner Expressway. And also they're also involved in the potential railed up park that is in talks. And this project is presented by the Michael Young Family Foundation and Evergreen, which is why this project has kind of come to light. Despite it not being an actual city project, these private groups have kind of gone the way of going public with what their proposal is in hopes to getting the public interested and also getting the city to do something. So their vision brings together patches of public green space that are currently kind of disconnected and inaccessible in order to create a signature destination. So their main idea is by making minor adjustments to the existing roadway on University Avenue, such as removing half the lanes and converting that 9.5 acres of city-owned asphalt onto native landscape, such as pedestrian walkways, bike paths, and cultural installations. They're hoping they can use this redesign to create a 90-acre park that spans from Queen's Park all the way down to the waterfront. So because this is such a large street, what they did is they decided to break this down into 4 different segments. So the first segment is Queen's Park and University Campus, which is at the north end. So this area is surrounded by buildings rich in both history and architectural details, but also at the same time is surrounded by disjointed parkland and busy. So it's quite impossible roadways for pedestrians to cross, especially since the actual legislative building, it's located in the middle of a ring of roadways, and even though that space has green space, it's really hard for people to cross the ring into the middle to actually use it. So the idea is to join Queen's Park with the green space that surrounds the University of Toronto campus by rerouting traffic on Queen's Park West. So they would move cars even further west, so you're not able to go around in a full circle. Also, they want to introduce a destination-worthy multi-use trail. I don't know how that's supposed to look like, but they're hoping that trail would traverse through the interior of Queen's Park and bringing you out. And then by doing that, they also hope to enable pedestrians and bicyclists to travel more safely in and out of the park entrances. And the second segment is Hospital District, which is just south of that. Their goal is to permanently consolidate University Avenue into 4 lanes. So their plan is to convert that all into the western side of the road. So the eastern side, they turn it into park space. And they would fill the space between the existing median and the eastern laneways with bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, and vegetation. And also just in general create an open green space where people in the hospitals, visitors, patients, and employees can gather outside. And also a pretty useful space for lunches. The second park is Osgood Park and the Opera House. So their goal is the same idea as the hospital stretch, is to expand the park in the eastern side and consolidate all the cars onto the west of the lane. And then on the waterfront part, their idea is pretty thin and is just to provide an uninterrupted path that leads all the way to the Toronto's waterfront. So it's quite a nice plan, but it's nothing as major, I guess, as Yonge Street, Toronto, and their proposal.
So now let's get into what Yonge Street is doing. With a little background, Yonge Street is the longest non-highway street in Canada, spanning from the downtown core all the way north into East Gwillimbury at about 56 kilometers. On top of this, Yonge Street is Toronto's most iconic main street, as many of the city's largest celebrations have been hosted on the street. This includes various parades, celebrations.
They're food festivals.
Yeah, different festivals. With specific regard to just the downtown Yonge Street area, within just a 10-minute section, there are over 180,000 residents living in some of Canada's tallest residential towers with no private open space. Most of these residents have to rely on the sidewalks to get exercise. And now we know that the sidewalks, as we talked about earlier, have always been a little bit of an issue. While Yonge Street was designed with 4 vehicular lanes, the sidewalks are only about 2 to 3 meters wide, which is already extremely inaccessible for individuals with mobility devices or strollers. But now in the age of COVID, where physical distancing is so important, the equity issues behind the accessibility of these sidewalks have intensified so much.
Yeah, and just from like a personal experience, like I was actually living downtown when the pandemic started. So I had to go down Yonge Street when I was either getting food, getting like getting important like things from like Shoppers Drug Mart, all that kind of stuff. Like Yonge Street was my main mode of transportation, and the sidewalks were often small, and like it was extremely hard to pass by someone in hopes of like keeping 6 feet without having to step onto the road, because there's no way you could do that. Like, and then another thing that made the problem worse, it's like there's a lot of scaffolding on Yonge Street, Toronto, especially at like the Yonge and Gerrard intersection, which basically blocks up half the sidewalk. So it's like, luckily where there was scaffolding, the I guess construction workers or like construction managers decided that like, okay, we'll put some concrete barriers into one of the lanes of traffic so people can actually like detour onto the road, so then you have more sidewalk space. But it's like, to have that permanently is not sustainable, and it's not nice
Right, for
people to
sure.
walk through.
And we all know that having any type of barriers that affect drivers and their way to get into where they want to go is never a good sign, because that just leads to angry drivers. And I think that is a bigger problem for another episode, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's like you have in this situation angry drivers and angry pedestrians, because like there was no space for people to walk. And like, this is only from my experience. It's like I can't even imagine being like someone with a stroller, someone that requires wheelchair access or mobility issues. It's like, if you have to get off the sidewalk onto the road to detour, it's like there is a bump and there is no ramp. It's like, how are people supposed to do that?
Exactly. Well, the proposal for Yonge Street, named Young Tomorrow, is a proposal to transform Yonge Street into a world-class 21st century urban destination, and it supports critical public health objectives. The proposal includes a full and flexible redesign of the street from College Street south to Queen Street. This means that the sidewalks will be expanded to a minimum of 4 meters, 6-meter wide 2-lane roadways with mountable curbs and vehicular paving will be installed, and 2.7-meter wide furnishings with plantings and a cafe zone is also proposed. What this means is that the sidewalk will be hopefully much more accessible for those in need of mobility devices, and it will also help with the physical distancing mandate that is required with the COVID going on, as well as for the future when hopefully the pandemic isn't as large of an issue, but accessibility will also be a concern. So with this proposal, on February 3rd, 2021, City Council actually adopted the recommended design, and that this means that the proposal has been approved and it's on to the next steps. So if everything goes as planned, construction of the redesign of Yonge Street is set to start in 2023. And that is in 2 years. So with the possibility of this happening, how does that make you feel, Andrea?
Knowing that it's not starting until 2023, it's kind of like unfortunate, because I feel like by the time 2023 does happen, COVID would be much more under control, and it feels like it's a bit late. However, I do welcome this change, and I do welcome change. I do like the idea of returning the streets back to the people, especially in an area where it is heavily dense and heavily populated by people that are walking. Like, most of people in this area, they don't drive. So it's like, by returning more of the streets and taking, giving them more space to walk and actually feel comfortable, and giving people a space that they can actually gather rather than just an empty public square. I think it is a very nice idea, and it's also nice that, like, I understand, I guess the reason why they're not starting until 2023 is that this project is also a way for City of Toronto to upgrade their water mains, and they're not doing that until 2023. So it's like, It's a nice, like, kill two birds with one stone project. Yeah. So what about you? What do you think, Haley?
Yeah, so I agree that it's kind of disappointing that the construction will start so late with 2 years in between right now when it was approved to when the construction will begin. But I am very happy to hear that the proposal has been approved and there are plans to go through with it. Although with everything, even though something is confirmed, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. A lot of things between now and then will occur, such as different stakeholder meetings.
Or even budget cuts.
Oh, that's a big issue. Let's hope.
And budget cuts,
Let's hope that doesn't affect it too much.
Okay, cross our fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see that there is hope for to increase accessibility within the streets, because as you mentioned, a lot of people within these areas do rely on walking and don't have access to a car. So having the streets return to pedestrians is really important, and I think it's a great first step in how planning will change for the future.
Yeah, and like another thing to add is that not only are they making the sidewalks wider for people to walk and for like bicycle lanes and other like modes of transportation, but like I really like that like they're dedicating some space for like patios for like restaurants, especially on Yonge Street. There's a lot of eateries, and during the pandemic, a lot of them weren't able to set up like cafe spaces or cafes or patios because they don't have the space for it. So it's like by making also the sidewalk wider and dedicating space to it, it's like you're allowing for a permanent cafe or patio experience for people, and it like kind of livens up the street. Because it's nice to see people like outside sitting, socializing, like hanging out, like no matter the weather. Like
yeah, for sure. And especially with what you said about University Avenue being very gray with all the concrete, just seeing some greenery and plants around, it just brightens everything up and makes the city so much more
lively,
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like in comparison between like University Avenue and like Yonge Street, I think the overall the proposals are very like good in a sense, but I feel like the Yonge Street proposal has a much greater chance of impact to actually like everyday people's lives, because there is much more activity on the street, because like it's also like not only like eateries as I mentioned earlier, but it's also like a lot of stores. There's the Eaton Center, that's like one of the most like largest malls in Toronto, and also there's like tons of theaters on the street. So it's like it's a large like activity hub, and like by giving more people space, like more people are gonna want to be on the streets, and they're gonna want to spend the money in those places. So it's like
better for the economy.
Better for the economy. As for University Avenue, like the park itself, it's like it's a nice idea, but at the same time, it's like I feel like I don't know if it's enough. Because like just making green space throughout the length of the street, and adding some public installations is just, there's no guarantees that like a lot of people that are not working in those areas or traversing normally through those areas will like definitely use it compared to Yonge Street. So like maybe like the idea of like University Park, they can include some like commercial activity as well, or a commercial plan. Yeah.
But I guess there's still time to maybe add that into their proposal.
Yeah, because it's just a proposal for now. Like there is no action for it. Yeah.
Hopefully, within our future episodes, we'll be able to provide an update on that.
So I guess with that being said, it's like, what are your predictions for the future now that we have these two like major projects presented to us?
I guess this isn't so much of a prediction as it is more of a hope. But I'm hoping that with the Yonge Street proposal being approved, it'll set a precedent for more development in the future that will be more pedestrian focused and pedestrian oriented, because with a lot of the roads and street developments we have right now are based on like historical trends where we predicted that vehicular usage would be basically the future, and because of that everything that was planned for the future. So I'm hoping that this will set a precedence for bringing it back to a less vehicular focused planning, and designs will now focus again on human interactions and such. But what about you? What are your predictions? Do you have any?
Yeah, so I guess I have like three main categories of predictions. So the first one is like, I do agree with you. I do think this will set precedents, and I like hope the success of this project, and that would prove that like we need to reorientate our dependency on cars, and that like when we do plan streets, that we're not only planning for cars, we're planning for all different types of transportation. So it's like not only people
Right, for
walking,
sure.
but also cyclists and like people with like mobility issues. So it's like, I think the future of design is like we should plan with optimization of travel for everybody, and not just for like one specific group of people just because we think they may or may not use the street more, or they may or may not spend money more. So like that kind of leads me into the second prediction is like, when it comes to the economy, it's like the more people on the streets means more people spending money. And I think that'd be really good, especially in a post-COVID world where we're trying to re-stimulate the economy.
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
Like by 2023, like people are going to be out and they're going to have like 2 years money worth of saved, and they're going to be happier to spend it. At least I know I am. Like I'm excited to like in 2 years when I can go out, I can like spend my money that I've like saved up for the. And yeah, and like secondly, like with the success of the Yonge Street project, I hope this will further aid in like the support of the city of Toronto itself for future projects such as like University Park, and also the major one that's like Rail Deck Park. We haven't talked about this much about this episode, but like hopefully maybe in the future when there is something happening beyond just a proposal, that we can also talk about that. And I think the other idea is that like no matter how small any piece of land could be or how significant we might think it might be, like such as like laneways, it can contribute to like the overall environment of a neighborhood and make, I guess, the city much more friendlier. And yeah, so it's like overall it's just like I hope this provides a new standard of planning.
Yeah, I agree completely. And well, with that being said, that was the plan for now. Listen to our next episode to continue figuring it out with us.
Until then, thanks for following along to this episode, and remember to check out our Instagram page for what next plan is.